mamma mia. Okie dokie. Spaghetti. Ravioli. Mamma mia.
Come back when you can put up a fight.
Buenos días, good morning. This is the English channel. Can you hear me? Testing 1, 2, 3, 4.
Gracias.
De nada. Good morning. Good afternoon to those of you who are attending. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Good morning. Good afternoon to those of you who are joining us in this event from other latitude, from other continent, with other time zone. We are going to start this second plenary session of the Third World Forum on Cities and Territories of Peace. Actually, the closing of this forum that has been working for 1 year, since October of 2020, and has involved more than 50 events with hundreds of people who have taken the floor, institutions from different countries that gave rise to this process of construction of cities and territories of peace. This second plenary session is about a topic that is very topical in any region of the world: the impact of migrations in the cities and territories. The title is Hospitable Cities to Tackle an Issue that has a dramatic character and many realities. The role of cities and territories is cross-sectional to this forum, and the role of interaction and peace is the other cross-sectional aspect. They are united. If in a territory there's no social development, there's access to housing, access to mobility, to health, to education. We're talking about an insecure territory. If a territory lacks institutionality that regulates, that protects, that budgets and applies public policies, this is an insecure territory. If in a territory there are no environmental conditions, there's no conservation of resources, if there's no resilience before possible catastrophes, we're talking about an insecure territory. If there's no employment, if it's not possible to have autonomy for the sustenance of houses, families, we are talking about an insecure territory. These are all security factors. We're talking about human security. And also, if a territory is born and lives from day to night in a violent environment, we're talking about an insecure environment. All these components are part of what we want to tackle here, the construction of interaction and peace. And getting into hospitable cities, this topic, in fact, there are three big moments in the phenomenon of migration and refuge. The first moment that also implies policies, programs, projects, and actions related to the causes of migration, the causes of searching or seeking refuge. A second moment related to the transit, that hard path from the origin to the destination, and a third block related to the destination. How we can receive, include, and interact in that destination, those cities and territories, and produce scenarios of interaction and peace. This third component is the main one that we're going to discuss in this session, without forgetting the importance of the origin and the causes of migration and refuge, and the importance and drama of transit. To this end, here we have in person and virtually 6 colleagues who represent, in turn, institutions, entities committed in different tasks and responsibilities, but all of them committed with this. The session will take place with 2 rounds of 5 minutes for each one of the panelists. And I ask you to tell us who you represent and also focus the answers to my question. Luckily, we can be disciplined and we can have this dialogue. And well, I'll stop talking and I'm going to introduce Geraldine González Vega, who is with us in person, virtually, sorry. Thank you, Geraldine. I'm going to introduce you later, Samer Saliba, who is with us in person. Thank you. Dolores Paris, who is also with us in person. I'll introduce her later. Victor Manuel Quinteros, who is with us. Alice Pistolesi, also in person, and Jose Angel Calle. Thank you for coming. Now, without further ado, Geraldine González Vega, President of the Council to Prevent and Eliminate Discrimination in Mexico City. She is with us remotely. She has time constraints, and we are going to cut to the chase. Firstly, Geraldine, what are the main challenges that migration processes produce in your territory? I would ask you to tell us what you do in your platform. Thank you, Geraldine. You have the floor. Thank you very much. I thank you for the possibility of attending this forum in my city. I thank the possibility of it being hybrid and do this virtually given the busy agenda of the Council to prevent and eliminate discrimination in Mexico City in October. We are everywhere. We are very busy because this month we celebrate the month of culture for non-discrimination. The Council is a decentralized body of the Mexico City's government in charge of preventing and eliminating discrimination in this great city of Mexico. In this regard, we have several responsibilities with different priority groups and also persons in situation of mobility. And the challenges, as Antonio Zurita said in his introduction, to serve people in a situation in mobility, migrants, refugees, we have many challenges, and they are concentrated in cities. So in COPRED, we've insisted that one of the greatest challenges is to transfer this national perspective of the states, whether federal centralized, that see centralized policy, migration policy from that perspective and not the perspective of cities, to change that perspective, to understand that cities have to guarantee the rights of people in situation of mobility. In this regard, one of the biggest challenges as COPRED in Mexico City since the first caravans of migrants in October 3 years ago in 2018 is the issue of empathy. Understanding that many people in situation of mobility, and especially those who come in these caravans, that one is coming to Mexico City soon. I was reading in the papers in the morning, probably they will arrive, 3,500 people will arrive in Mexico City in the following 15 days. These people are looking for a better life conditions. They are forced due to crisis, economic crisis, social crisis, environmental crisis, violence, wars. And in this regard, one of the challenges as a city is to convey this to all the population and to all the people, all the public officers, in this case of Mexico City, to guarantee the access to the rights of migrants. I'd like to say, as Antonio said earlier, the relationship of the obligations with the officers in guaranteeing rights and peace in our country, cities, and region is fundamental. In this regard, we need to understand that rights are not finite. This is not a resource that is only guaranteed to a group or population, and then someone is stripped from this access. No, this has been a constant in the caravans and in general people in situation of mobility or migrants. The fact of having xenophobia based on prejudices, stereotypes related to migrants, and especially with migrants with a racist and aporophobic outlook, that is phobia, with hate towards people in conditions of poverty or extreme vulnerability. And to the extent that everyone, either Mexicans or not, may have a migration status or other, we have access to rights, we can live in societies in peace and in harmony, where also we celebrate diversity. This is a discourse that we have in the Council. We think it's fundamental to share. Celebrate diversity, because diversity always adds and generates this necessary inclusion. Finally, in the last minute left, I'd like to talk about the context of the pandemic, how the pandemic has exacerbated these inequality gaps that already existed among migrants in communities, in cities, in the access to rights, and also in xenophobia, in racism, discrimination, and violences they experience, and has produced this oblivion or forgetting these populations because they have to stay in the streets, they are homeless, they have no access to health or food, and it's also related to the access to an ID. In many places, in many spaces, this is a key for the exercise of rights. With the vaccination processes in Mexico City, we have sent the signal that like the access to vaccines can't be related to the nationality or the migration status of people. So these differentiated impacts of the pandemic in priority groups are fundamental, and we can't lose this perspective. And with this, I finish my 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you, Geraldine. We applaud you virtually. Thank you for your first participation. Xenophobia, racism, pandemic, interaction, the world of diversity. You mentioned some topics that, of course, will be part of our action plan to build interaction and peace. Secondly, Samer Saliba, who will speak in English. I say so because if you need support, he represents the Mayor's Migration Council, an entity that was born, as we were saying a few minutes ago, from a meeting that took place in Marrakesh, apart from a summit of states to talk about migration and refuge. There was a summit of mayors that started a covenant of mayors about migration and refuge. Welcome, Samir. And it's the same question I posed to Geraldine, and you already know it. You have the floor.
Gracias, Antonio. I'll give everybody a moment. I might be the only person in this room who doesn't speak Spanish, and yet I was still invited anyways. So thank you to Mariana and the City of Mexico for inviting me. Thank you, Antonio. As mentioned, I'm Samer Saliba, the head of practice at the Mayor's Migration Council, where we work with city governments to amplify their voices on issues of migration and displacement. And my specific job is to drive financial and technical resources to cities to support the tremendous efforts that they're doing on the ground to support migrants, refugees, and internally displaced. I'm just going to get right into it. We know two things. We know that people are moving to cities at greater rates than ever before. Mexico City alone, according to some new research from the Mayor's Migration Council and Columbia University, could see between 2.4 and over 10 million new arrivals into Mexico City by the year 2050. The second thing we know is that migrants arriving into the cities are doing so because they're seeking a better life, they're seeking safety, but when they arrive to a city, they face greater risks of discrimination, of violence, and of exclusion than other communities. With my colleagues from the Mixed Migration Center, we did research in Barranquilla, Medellin, and here in Mexico City of 300 migrants here in Mexico City, and we found that 34% felt discriminated against here in Mexico City, and 44% of Central Americans felt discriminated against, 83% of those because of their origin or because of the color of their skin. So there's tremendous challenge, but there's also tremendous opportunity. 78% of the people who we surveyed here in Mexico City feel safe where they live and do feel like they are protected and are not at a higher risk of violence out on public streets. So there's risks, there's opportunities, but there's also the preparedness that cities need for the growth that they're likely to see in the coming years. And what I want to highlight is that what city governments, the role of city governments, Antonio, as you were discussing, should be to emphasize vertical peace just as much as horizontal peace. Now, what do I mean by that? Too often we talk about horizontal peace, peace between communities, peace between the receiving communities and the migrants coming in. What we don't talk about is peace between the institutions and those communities. The accountability that city governments need to show to those communities so that they can trust the city to provide for them and all those critical services that you mentioned, Antonio. The provision of services is not enough. There has to be trust for migrant communities to access those services. Just for example, 74% of the people that we spoke to here in Mexico City don't feel like their opinions are taken into consideration when discussing the functioning of the city. So even though there may be services for them, and Mexico City is doing a tremendous amount to offer services to this community, there's more room for accountability. There's more room for these migrant communities' voices to be heard in how the city functions. And this is crucially important because providing accountability to migrants now builds cohesive communities for the future. And there's a tremendous moment we have now, across Latin America especially, to work with migrant communities to better understand not only their needs and the services we need to provide for those needs, but also their preferences. I want to wrap up with just a quick example from my dear friend who I'm so excited. You know that he's on leave right now, but he still showed up. I didn't know he was going to show up. My friend Victor, who's on the screen behind me. We're supporting Lima through our Global Cities Fund to deliver services in Cercado de Lima district. And I'm sorry, Victor, if I'm going to speak about your project or give some of the remarks that you might make. But I do want to sing Victor's praises because he's working with migrant communities, migrant organizations, registering Venezuelan communities to work side by side with the city of Lima to raise awareness about the services that Lima is providing, make sure people are aware of them, make sure people can trust them. And while they're doing it within one specific area in Cercado de Lima, the hope is that Lima can really pilot this or expand this project across the city. Mexico City is doing the same. A lot of the cities that we're working with is doing the same. But it's really, important to include the voices of migrant communities if we are to prepare for a more cohesive future in the years ahead. Thank you.
Pues gracias.
Well, thank you so much, Samer. You have helped me introduce Victor now. Victor from Lima, who has joined us, a wonderful city in Latin America, Peru. And as other big cities, is facing the double challenge of migration, immigration of people coming from other countries in the region, as well as migration, rural migration towards the cities. Victor, you have the floor now. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation to this forum to share the experience of a local government, which is the government of the city of Lima. Jorge Muñoz is the mayor there, and this complements the national initiatives that we have here. It is a very important complement that has two different lines of action, which intend to assume the number one challenge, which is the social and economic integration of migrants and refugees. These two lines are one, programmatic, second, immediate actions. Programmatic actions have to do with the development of national migration policies, but this is not a specific development. The presence of migrants before the migration from Venezuela was of around 12,000 foreigners in the city. And this has increased from 12,000 in 2014 to more than 1 million in 2021. That is to say, in the last 4 years, there has been a huge mobility. This translates into the fact that from the city of Lima, we concentrate 80% of that mobility, and we have to work on both lines. First, we need to develop a development plan, which is the main management tool in the city of Lima. The topic of migration has to be worked with a cross-cutting view in a formal document so that its inclusion is reflected on planning instruments as well as budget. Because if you want to integrate a migrant population socially and economically, you have to work in health, education, security, access to basic services as well. But the programmatic line implies that there is a period to prepare this. We're in the right moment because the development plan for the Metropolitan Area in Lima, it starts in 2022 through 2035. So we are precisely in this process. One of the immediate actions which responds to the current phenomenon, but the momentum is very important for the local government because we're working with the people and with the immediate problems, and we are having very important initiatives as specific houses for migrants that were discussed by summer precisely. This is supported by the Mayor's Migration Council and has as a pilot the Lima Cercado, which is a historic center, as a goal. It is divided into 16 sections. Each of these 16 sections has an office to provide attention to migrant neighbors, to provide them with municipal services for refugees and migrants. But we are not just waiting, sitting down at the office. As Summer said, this is not an information office. No, this is an office that has a spirit of promotion, of integration agents. They are the ones who disseminate the information and provide these services in the field to the migrants in faraway areas or the invisible areas, either in the city or in the district. So the concept that we handle here, the main integration concept here, and I will elaborate on this in my second participation, is the concept of the neighbor. Neighbor understood as the person that has a relationship with the local government, irrespective of their nationality, Peruvian, Venezuelan, Mexican. Peru and Lima are affected precisely by the same problems: insecurity, cleanliness, solid residues treatment, access to culture, to education. Services are provided to the neighbors, and if anyone can be a neighbor, then the integration work is simpler because we are having a local government relationship with equals, irrespective of their nationality. And this also has to do with the neighbor participation work. And this is where I work. I help migrants in their organization, have representatives, have the same rights. That is to say, they can also have participative budget and even be part of the local representation system and be able to run for an office. So we have to treat equally all the migrant population, and by doing so, we have a success formula because we are preventing discrimination. By doing so, we are preventing xenophobia and also the lack of access to food, which is the main impact of COVID that has also affected migrants in extreme poverty or poverty. So this territorial exercise that we have done with the Mayor's Migration Council has to be consolidated not only in other districts, but throughout the whole territory, trying to improve the decision-making processes. This is why we are implementing a survey. This is not a department survey. This is not a national survey. We need consistency at a district level. So with the support of the Union of Ibero-American Capital Cities, UCCI, we are developing a survey only in the territory of the district of Cercado in order to understand topics that have to do with employment, entrepreneurship, in general with the knowledge of the economic situation in the refugees and migrants. It has to do with the contact with institutions and participative factors, experience, discrimination, violence, social data, social demographic data. This is done locally. The survey is done locally. We need to know through the migrant neighbor offices the information in order to have statistical information and understand where to make decisions, where to place groups of migrants in different territories, and based on that to continue implementing integration strategies, including recovery of public spaces through different actions to recreate the intention of integrating migrants, walls that are called like migration walls, integration walls, on areas where we have more accumulation of migrants. And it is in those spaces that we give the neighbors, children, teenagers the possibility to paint the space. For example, a wall may recreate a hut between two people with two different flags, the flag from Venezuela and the flag from Peru. And those participating as artists are migrants, people that we have received. It is a way to integrate them and fight against the rejection generated by misinformation. To give you some statistical information, it is said that violence arrives with migration, where in real terms the number of migrants in the jail system in Peru is not even of 1%. Just as the number of claims filed to the police against migrants, it is not even of 2%. So the figures allow us to generate information to eliminate wrong ideas derived from the presence of migrants in the cities. Together with the information, we need to have territorial work and the conceptualization of migrants, not as such, but rather as neighbors. And this is a formula that has worked. Right now, only in Lima, we have 5 different organizations of migrant population that has formalized its existence. I don't mean legally formalized. These are not organizations that have been incorporated to exercise civil rights. No. I mean, they have registered at the municipality to generate mechanisms for communication with the local government. That representativeness that allows them to offset the lack to services and make a contribution in the proposal of solutions. In all the cities, what we want is that neighbors are not people who always complain, but rather that they participate and work together to find solutions. I am talking as a neighbor now, trying to find a solution. But deep within me, I mean the neighbor who is a foreigner. The mere idea of talking about a neighbor is a formula, is a word of integration, and it flows with the concept and the problems that they have to face. So our experience is territorial, and through the survey, local survey, we intend to strengthen the messages, be more precise in the territories to cover, and also be precise if, depending on the territory, which are the concerns and topics, depending on the migrants in Cercao, and this statistical information is ready now, we don't mean a higher percentage of residents. There are a lot of people, but in transit. These are the migrants in this place, people who work in the large corporations, trade corporations, exercising informal trade activities, selling on the streets. So there is a huge challenge there of employment regarding the economic development, trying to find formulas for entrepreneurship. Victor, I'm sorry, Victor, but we have run out of time already. In reality, you have started to cover the second part of this round. Thank you so much for all your proposals. You have to close in 30 seconds, please. Yes, of course. I wanted to close my intervention saying that when we talk about economic development, we have to base our decisions on the characteristics of the territory. So territorial deployment, data for more precise decisions, but not at the national level, but rather at a local level. And finally, to use the concept of neighbor as the main social and economic integration formula. Thank you so much, Victor. This round of applause is for you. Now, you have mentioned the word neighbor in different occasions. Neighbor understood as a person who gets the benefits of services, and neighbor also as a person who participates. One of the great challenges as well is how to foster actions, projects, programs, initiatives from the different public institutions in order to promote the participation of migrants. I would like to give the floor now to Maria Dolores Paris. We go to the border now, one of the largest borders in the world, I would say. From the Colegio de la Frontera Norte, Dolores Paris represents an institution which, in addition to being an observer, makes proposals of different initiatives to approach this topic. You have the floor now, Maria Dolores. Thank you so much. Thank you. In reality, Mexico is living a challenge which is similar to that in Peru. We are living an accelerated growth of flows, but with a great difference. We have a huge border, more than 3,000 kilometers, with the United States. Historically, this is the main country that receives migrants in the world. And therefore, we have become like a belt. Mexico has assumed itself, generally speaking, as a country of origin. Of course, we have more than 10% of the population in the United States as a country of return and as a country of transit, and every now and then also as a destination country. But it was not until recently that the percentage of foreign population in Mexico was very low, less than 0.5%. If we don't take into account the children of Mexicans born in the United States. However, what we are now seeing is that there has been a huge increase of the flows in the last few years. Mainly in this year, we have seen an outlook, the unprecedented outlook, not only because of the amount of people crossing the country, that is to say, this phenomenon of caravans has a lot of visibility, but it accounts for less than 1% of the transit through the country, but also because of the diversity. We still have a majority of the population coming from 3 Central American countries, which are Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. But a growing percentage that now accounts for more than 40% of people coming from many different places in the world, mainly Haiti, Cuba, Ecuador, Nicaragua, even Peru, Brazil, and many other countries. So what we are living now is a growth in the flows, and also a longer waiting period, even for years, on the border. Why are they having to wait? Because a lot of people are expelled to Mexico, to the border, and some of them will try again to cross. Some of them will try to ask for asylum in the United States, and they will have to wait for months, even years, in the last 3 or 4 years on the Mexican side. So We all have known migration forever. Tijuana is a city which is located in the northwest part of Mexico. We are at the border with San Diego. And historically, this has been a city of migrants. What we have seen for the last years are shelters provided by civil society, mainly of the Catholic Church. We had the Calabrinianos, who are also in other cities in Latin America and also in Italy and Europe. And we have several shelters and receiving places of civil society. The state had never taken part of these because they assumed that Mexico just crossed Mexico through Tijuana, crossing to the United States. Now that they can no longer cross, that there is a block, or that they are sent back to Mexico and that they have to wait for months or years, then the state, for the first time, or the federal government, for the first time, has created reception centers, one in Tijuana and another one in Ciudad Juárez. They are called Centros de Integración al Migrante, Migrant Integration Centers, Synod factories, maquila plants, which are empty now, and where we receive the most vulnerable population. Now I go to this part, which is the most vulnerable population or underprivileged people of this large group of migrants, which are the ones that are have asked for asylum either in Mexico or in the United States. The flows that we received, the High Commission, the United Nations call them mixed flows. We can see all the way from climate change, because in places like the ones that had hurricanes at the end of last year, or countries that have problems of general violence, insecurity, political chaos, as it is happening in Haiti. And we also have people who had to leave everything behind and have to migrate because of threats, political prosecutions, sometimes because of gang threats. And these groups are the ones that are arriving here to the Centers for Attention to Migrants in Tijuana. For example, we are having around 680 people. All of them are families with small children, and they have had to escape from their countries, or even Mexico. In Mexico, we have a very serious problem of organized crime. And right now, 2/3 of the people who have requested refuge in the United States are forced, displaced, internal persons who are fleeing from the cities of Michoacan or the states of Michoacan and Guerrero. So the city of Mexico is right now under a similar situation that Tijuana had a few years ago. There is to say, there is some visibility, as explained by our colleague before. They are invisible. There is invisibility of migrants. They arrived to the city, hundreds of thousands every year, because this is like a node, a crossing node of the different migration routes leading to the United States. They stay here for 2 or 3 days. They look for a small hotel. There are only 3 shelters by civil society, none of the government, and therefore we don't have any reception system in the city of Mexico. And Tijuana has just started 18 months ago with these centers, as well as in Ciudad Juárez. The country is just starting now to assume itself as a destination country, but from now to the next 2 or 3 years, situation will change a lot. Thank you very much, Dolores. With these first contributions, you have taken us to a more dramatic reality of the last mile of this transit. And you have also reminded us a reality. All the countries make a contribution of migrants, but receive migrants as well. All the cities send and receive migrants. Now we are going to jump and go to a different place in the world, a different reality, which is just at the other side of the Atlantic. We are going to travel to Europe now. Alice Pistolesi represents an entity based in Italy, Atlante delle Guerre e dei Conflitti del Mondo, that has a global agenda as an observatory, global observatory of different dramas, of different situations of violence, war, and conflicts, also including the phenomenon of refugee and migration beyond the experience of Italy in the Mediterranean, as well as the experience of Italy with the African continent. Atlante is an observer, an international observer. If you feel comfortable to talk in your perfect Spanish or reading as you have prepared, you have the floor now, you can choose a language. Thank you so much and good morning. I'm very happy to be in Mexico representing the Atlante delle Guerre, delle Conflitti del Mondo Association that has published for the last 2 years the Atlas of Wars and Conflicts in the World. We have always been actively involved in the information, and this year together with a sister place which is called Unimondo, another site. In this first part of the session, I would like to concentrate on the reception system in Italy because it has as a base municipalities, and on the second presentation I will be sharing some positive experiences in Italy with the civil society. We have from the very beginning dealing with the topic of migration, which is a very important and complex topic in Italy. In 2020, 26,963 people requested asylum or protection in our country. After having said this, one first important thing that has to be considered is that reception in Italy is limited only to those who reach the places refugees, and therefore they become asylum requesting people. The law in Italy denies the possibility of arriving there to find a job. The only exception is for a small part, around 60,000 people every year, that allowed to legally go to Italy under seasonal contracts to work mainly in the agricultural sector. However, once the contract ends, those migrants must go back to their home. They cannot stay in Italy. This means that the idea of migration in Italy is forbidden. I mean, we do not admit the right to migrate except for their own citizens. Around 200,000 Italians leave the country every year to look for a future in other country. Therefore, the reception model that has been developed in Italy has to do with refugees and not migrants. In Italy, you can only receive those declaring that they are escaping from war or they are fleeing from a catastrophe. However, 76% of the requests analyzed in 2020 had a negative response. This is the general regulatory framework, a very difficult outlook also in Italy, as you can see. However, what's interesting is that the model of reception that we have developed is basically a generalized model which has at its very heart or core the municipalities that will have to act together with the prefecturas that represent the Ministry of the Interior. Here there is a strong contradiction as well in the Italian system. They have always depended not in the social and economic ministry, but the police ministry. Migration is therefore associated with a public order issue, because it depends on the Ministry of Police. Now, foreign citizens rescued at sea or getting in the territory illegally are sent to government centers, which are located close to the areas of disembarkment or close to the country for the first medical attention and to make a picture and signalize. Therefore, nobody can arrive in Italy illegally. After the first phase, the first reception centers, they go to the reception center in migration, which is called SAE. They can have access to the system, both those requesting asylum or refugee as well as those that need protection, unlike the first center, which is handled centrally. This is organized by the Central Service, which this is assigned by the Department of the Interior, by the National Association of Italian Municipalities.
The priority of the projects is assigned to local authorities that voluntarily activate and implement projects for the reception and integration of migrants. But this has been affected by the executive orders of 2018 that have affected the resources of the projects. By the end of this period, inside, local administrations may implement other initiatives with the purpose of promoting individual autonomy of citizens and beneficiaries of the SAE system. In this case, or in case of having no places in the first and second reception programs, the districts may establish extraordinary shelter centers called CAS and trust them to private entities through the public allocation contracts system. Even though it's an extraordinary system, the CAS, over the years, the use of said systems has become the most important one. Thank you, Alice. You've mentioned another interesting topic, which is collaboration or cooperation between the municipality or the public institution of the territory and the social fabric that commits with this reception. So this is important to highlight. Now it's the turn of Ángel Calle, Director of the Agencia Extremeña de Cooperación Internacional para el Desarrollo from Extremadura, Spain, bordering with Portugal, territory of reception and territory committed with cooperation and solidarity. Ángel, whenever you want, you know you have 2 turns and you can use your time as you wish. Thank you, Antonio. Well, my colleague was nervous, and she's done it exceptionally, as my other colleagues. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for the possibility of being here. I'd like to thank the International Organizing Committee. I'd like to thank each one of the workers of the forum, because we are having a great time, and it's being very easy to be here, and we feel very fortunate. One of the proposals for this session was to analyze the big challenges. I'm going to read them. The challenges of migration in our territory. I'm going to be very clear, because I think that the big challenge of migrations today is to be able to have an education process to understand society, that migration is here to stay, and this is a natural process since human beings are human beings. This can't be answered. Migrations, therefore, need a story and an education for us to understand that they are not a problem, but rather an actual challenge that our administrations at multiple levels should be able to manage decently. In the beginning, Antonio invited us to reflect, saying that we are institutions with different formulas that are committed. I don't think so. We are institutions that do what they have to do, and this is what we have to generalize. How are we able to explain our citizens that migrations are a natural fact? If you allow me the anecdote, they start from the sperm and the egg. Moving in that flow, you have to move from one point to the other to nowadays that we are here. This is a forum on peace. Indeed, no one that risks peace as those promoters of hate that internationally and in an organized fashion are being able to get to the bodies of government. You were talking about the law of 2012, the Posifini law. We talked about Trump and Bolsonaro. We talked about so many heads of state and governments that use migrations to break and question the peace of our territories. So how can we explain our citizens the natural fact of migrations? This is the biggest challenge that migrations pose. And to this end, I think it's necessary to be able to own a healthy narrative and an honest narrative with ourselves. Migrations suppose human mobility of 3%. It hasn't decreased or increased. Throughout the history of human beings, 3% of migration fluctuates. It's true. The ones who are going to be asylum seekers are going to increase. These promoters of hate always deny climate change, the effect that climate change and the fact of the migration flows is going to make that asylum seekers and refugees to increase. But migration is stagnated and naturally is 3% of the world population. I'm from Extremadura, as your mother. I'm from Extremadura, one of the autonomous regions of Spain. In the 60s and 70s, our population had to migrate, 50%. So you can make an analysis in your head and calculate how many members does your family have? Half? Which one would you say goodbye? No one migrates by their own accord. We have to be aware of this. You don't migrate voluntarily. Another important element is you don't migrate to a country that won't receive you. Migrations are indicators of development. Migrations are indicators of wealth. A population that receives migrants is naturally a rich population. Extremeños go to Switzerland, of course. Well, they wouldn't go to Mauritania. Migration, therefore, should be conceived from a favorable and positive aspect. They enrich us, they give us plurality and diversity, they give us culture. And in European terms, my colleagues will understand this. The welfare states that form this tool that redistributes wealth and opportunities needs them. We need migrant population in Europe. We need to rejuvenate our population. Spain has 47 million people, and it will be the oldest population along with Japan. Our welfare system needs these people to pay their fees, needs production capacity. And it is evident that this pandemic has left us some learning. Number one, production delocalization is a risk for us. I'm not talking about anarchy, but we need to produce some things in our territory, and therefore we need production capacity. This is not to commercialize migration, but to look for bidirectional synergies. Therefore, I insist, we have a big challenge with migrations. We can have more or less decent host processes, but we can explain it from a positive point of view. There will be more Trumps and more Bolsonaros. There will be more Le Pen, more Vox, like in Spain. There will be more anti-system political forces that are part of the system to tear them away and to prevent us from having a decent policy to receive migrants. Peace is questioned if these people are part of our institutions, and this is what we should be able to preserve, understand migrations as what they are, a natural historical element, an element that produces wealth in all senses of the concept of wealth, and of course, stabilizes the situations of peace. That's why in this case of Extremadura, then we can talk about it. I know I'm getting to my time limit. We have an evident strategy that goes from the origin to the transit and strengthening the humanitarian corridors, the attention in our borders, and of course, and to strengthen a generalized idea in our territory in between extremeños of that necessary idea that migrations are favorable, that makes us better as society. Thank you very much, Angel, for your global reflection and for explaining something that you will elaborate later on, which is specific commitment and specific initiatives in Extremadura. Geraldine had issues with her time. She can't be here till the end, and without further ado, Geraldine, what can you tell us briefly, because we don't have enough time. What can you tell us about specific proposals and initiatives, and also a question for all the panelists? What do you think that could be done in this case from the forum? Thank you very much. It's been very interesting to listen to my colleagues and their experiences and proposals in their own trenches. I would mention two things: horizontal peace and peace with authorities. I think this concept is fundamental because it is the essence of the participation of people, not only the citizen participation in terms of elections or decision-making, but also the participation of all people in terms of the guarantee of our rights. And what José Ángel mentioned about understanding migrations as a natural fact, a historical fact, it is here, it has always been here, and we have to learn to understand it and be empathetic. Finally, I'd like to highlight what Dr. Pori said about the diversity of migrant populations. And as she said, not only the diversity of people in their national origin, but also the diversity of people who are migrating. For example, she talked about this caravan. Now, I'm talking about the caravan because it's visible, it's now in the news, but evidently our country, we have thousands of people that are traveling through our countries, but I wanted to present an X-ray because within this population, we find like pregnant women, minors in this caravan. I was reading that 40% are boys, girls, and adolescents. That is, they are minors. So this poses specific challenges because they are not accompanied. There are also people from the LGBT population, indigenous peoples, Afro-descendants, disabled people, elders. So having this intersectional perspective is not only a challenge, but also gives us a key to address these proposals. As part of the proposals from COPRED this afternoon, and if you allow me, I'm going to make an ad because in this important international forum, we will have the presentation of a guideline that we created in COPRED as representative of the Mexico City's government for the Ibero-American cities against discrimination and xenophobia of UNESCO. It's known as Coalición LAC, and with UNESCO, this project on human mobility for local governments in Latin America and the Caribbean. So today we are going to present this guideline at 3 p.m. We invite you. And this is a tool for cities in order to implement good practices and policies and, above all, foster the inclusion of people in transit in host regions. And specifically in Mexico City, the Secretary of Inclusion and Social Wellbeing, CIVISO, is the area in charge of formulating public policies for the attention of migrants. A few days ago, my colleague Jorge Hidalgo, who is in charge of migration, announced an ID card for migrants. And in my previous intervention, I was talking about how an ID is a key to access rights. And this ID card works as a guarantee for services and also education, access to health, and work. And regarding work in COPRED, we have a very important strategy of an outreach strategy with the private sector in Mexico City with an agreement for egalitarian treatment, which is to generate these communication networks, this cooperation between the government and companies in this case that are providing employment opportunities to all people to generate inclusion and diversity policies. So these are some of the actions. In my previous participation, I said October is the month of culture for non-discrimination. This cultural perspective, evidently migrants contribute visions, perspectives, diverse cultural perspectives, and through them we can understand and get to know each other, and we can be empathetic. And this is one of the proposals of this month that has this cultural perspective, and we work hand in hand with the Secretary of Culture of Mexico City and UNESCO. And finally, I'd like to tell you that through the partnerships, we take into account communities in general. Dr. Poise said before that traditionally migrants crossed our country. We were a transit country, and now, given the policies of our neighbor country, they stay here many times in the border of our country, but also they stay to look for refuge and asylum in our country. And in Mexico City specifically, this is what we do in COPRED. And we need to have this perspective, and with this perspective, understand that the attention of migrants is everyone's task. It's not only for civil society organizations that receive them through shelters or only the government to guarantee rights, but also as a community, we have to generate spaces of peace where we celebrate diversity and everyone has a place and access to rights, and no one is left behind. And I'm going to conclude my participation with this. I greet my colleagues in the panel and all the people who are participating, and we're here to assist you if you need anything in COPRED. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Geraldine. Thank you for highlighting those points. Something I want to mention before giving the floor back to Samer. We've talked about the partnership between public institutions, the academia present in this panel, the research centers, universities, the social fabric, organized civil society, and it is important to incorporate another important stakeholder in this reflection, the corporate world, the private sector, that can also implement practices to dignify employment. I will not get into this because I'm not a panelist, but a moderator. And Summer, now you have the floor.
Thank you, Antonio. I've been thinking about what I can say in 30 seconds to sort of summarize everything that I've heard. And I think the idea that keeps coming to my head is, as Angel was saying, migration is not the challenge. The challenge is preparing and providing for migrants in an inclusive way as neighbors, not as migrants. And there's a real opportunity at the city level to not think about them from a question of visa, from a question of border, but as a question of citizens of the city. I think that's the first real opportunity. The second real opportunity is this opportunity to learn from how migrants interact with one another. I was thinking about the caravan, and we often think about caravans as this almost like this monster coming across the hill. But when you think about it, a caravan is a group of people coming together for a unified cause. And you see this across the world when you look at migrant and displaced communities. They stick together. They stick together. My own family is from Lebanon. We moved to a small town in Massachusetts in the United States, and we didn't do that by ourselves. We moved there with 20 other families in this small town. And so how can we learn from that? And I think in Mexico City, the project that we're supporting here in Mexico City is a great example of how city governments can stick together. The work that they're doing is not just the Secretary of Livelihoods, not just Cebiso, not just the Secretary of Health, but is actually one of the first times that those three agencies are collaborating together for a unified cause. And it is that collaboration, that sticking together, especially at the city level, that I think is crucially important. It takes internal coordination at the city government, but also, as you were saying, Antonio, and as others were saying, collaboration with other stakeholders as well. And I think that that's a lesson that we can learn from migrant and displaced communities. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Recalcar.
I'd like to highlight this as well, and as Angel said, in our history of our peoples, our cities and territories, and our families, there are stories of migration. We should start from our own experiences to propose and commit ourselves. Let's continue, Victor, very briefly, because before you took up a lot of time. In 1 minute, I know this is a huge effort, but what can you add about this? Yes, very quickly, regarding programmatic and immediate actions. Programmatic-wise, we have this cross-sectional pillar in this concerted development plan. What we are implementing is a human mobility plan with a socio-economic integration approach linked to employment, entrepreneurship, work skills, citizens interaction, participation, and prevention of discrimination and xenophobia. So there's work focused on this, and immediate actions just to complement organizations. In Cercado de Lima, we have offices, but we have 29 in the Metropolitan Area, and we will continue working with them. And just to mention that, just as there are murals to integrate both populations, we also use art, and youngsters are part of this dynamic. The last contest we had was a rap contest. 40 young people were part, among them 6 Venezuelans. We had 8 runner-ups, and the champion was from Venezuela. This was a democratic and very enthusiastic contest. So everything is useful for this integration. I'm going to wrap up by saying that the concept and the calls are always for neighbors, irrespective of their nationality. Thank you very much. Thank you, Victor. Well, we give you a hand, both in person and virtually. I think that your experience is incorporated in number 4 of our magazine of Cities of Peace. Thanks for reminding us. Now we're going to continue with Dolores. Dolores, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to be very brief because recently, with the collaboration of many organizations of the civil society that work with migrants in Mexico, we prepared a document. I'm not going to present it. It's more than 40 pages, and the idea is to relocate people who are blocked in our southern border. The other border there is much poorer than the northern border, especially in the city of Tapachula. Now, this is the reason of the caravan, fundamentally. We have more than 90,000 people, 63,000 up to September 30 have asked for refuge in the city of Tapachula, a city of 350,000 inhabitants, and Chiapas is one of the poorest states in the country. Most of these people is homeless. They are in very dire conditions, and they can't leave the city due to the security rates established by the National Guard and the National Migration Institute. Therefore, the idea, according to the laws, this is a very technical document to try to relocate this population. I think this is an ideal opportunity for Mexico City to allocate resources for the relocation of families so that they don't have to travel 1,000 kilometers by foot to get to Mexico City. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dolores, for your accuracy in your ideas and proposals. We are writing down everything, and this World Forum is an excellent platform for the exchange of experiences and for the projection of these experiences so that we can replicate them. Let's continue. Alice, this is your second turn. What we want to highlight is our model. Behind wars and conflicts of the world, we have supported and we still support. Riace is a small town of the Calabria region in the south of Italy, a land that has many hardships and a historical problem because we have criminal organizations. The story started in 1988 with the arrival of 200 refugees from Kurdistan, and the mayor of this municipality opened the doors of houses that were empty due to an immigration that condemned Riace to be transformed into a town, ghost town. And in the country, schools were opened. We financed microactivities. We installed laboratories, bars, and bakeries. The model, however, was not considered decent by many. On the contrary, it has been hindered and or ignored. In 2018, the mayor was investigated due to embezzlement, administrative irregularities, and illegal migration. In September of this year, he was convicted to twice as double the years requested by the prosecutor's office. This is a sentence that many consider to be unfair. In any case, it is political. Our reaction as a work group, along with many people of the civil society in Italy, is to defend Lugano, the mayor, and implement concrete actions. One of those actions is a rescue ship of human lives lives, and during last year, it has been in the sea. RESC includes two complementary activities that take place in the sea and inland. In the sea, a team of professionals and volunteers collects testimonies of what's happening a few miles away from our shores. And at land, the activity is to inform constantly the public opinion through the media. In schools and public meetings, the objective is to prevent massacres. According to statistics, at least 1,046 people died in the Mediterranean attempting to get to Europe in the first half of 2021. And we, as organization, are part of this project from the beginning, and also we're in charge of the information through our website, and we've contributed concretely to fund raising, and we've looked for possible sponsors, and also with private companies. To conclude, we feel part of the project of the Forum of Cities and Territories of Peace. In Italy, this was a reality thanks to two presentations that we organized with the support of the UN Program for Development,
which is precisely the first city to be part of it, and Vatican City. These were two very different important moments. The first one is to make the project visible, to bring together realities which specifically deal with peace and territories, with 1,000 actions a day, with a 2030 agenda, and the idea of responsible citizenship. What it is that we expect to achieve? This is a project that we are working with an Italian musician, is to take to Italy one of the next activities of the forum to reaffirm its importance in our country and make an actual contribution to the construction of peace with concrete actions and words which may be representative of our desires of a better world where we can all live together. Thank you, Elise. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for reminding us of the two great events that Atlante promoted in Italy, one together with the Vatican City and the second with Italian cities. And without any further ado, and almost as the final speaker, Angel, you have your second turn. You have the floor now, Angel. Thank you. We cannot be on behalf of the Junta de Extremadura in Mexico talking about migrations, peace. Antonio will understand what I mean by this without remembering President Lázaro Cárdenas, who hosted between 20 and 25,000 Spanish people in exile. We cannot talk about peace. We cannot talk about migration if we don't do that from the exercise of memory. So for me, it's a singular fact and a very emotional one to be able to be in this city talking about these topics in this forum. And if you let me, Antonio, I would like to invite you to be part of this family as Junta de Extremadura, of this committee that gathers so many. First, I would like to thank you for that. I will continue insisting in the healthy exercise of pedagogy, of explaining migrations, of what they are, and what does an international cooperation agency has to do, even in investing budget in something like this. Well, we want to guarantee that cooperation may continue existing, that migrations may continue existing, then solidarity, tenderness of the two peoples may continue existing. There are many, many things that we have developed throughout these years. I invite you to connect to us, those who are in Europe, connect yourselves to the 4th Forum of Journalism of Migrations that we developed in Mérida, Spain. The other Mérida, the Mérida in Extremadura. This is a forum that intends to become a partner of journalists throughout the world to see how it is that we are capable to narrate and explain migrations from that healthy paradigm of decency. The Guardians, Jazeera, Freelance, New York Times, everywhere in the Mediterranean, people who are relevant of the world of journalism throughout Latin America, this will happen on November 11, 12, and 13, but you can do an online follow-up of this event. You can register at what they call Congreso de Mérida, Mérida Congress, which is practically closing its registration. We have a safe space network that allows and fosters the integration and inclusion in all the different public spaces of our region, autonomous region. There is a poster in red that says, "Welcome to this safe place, free of discrimination because of identity, age, orientation, ethnia, anything. You are safe here at the Junta de Extremadura." We make all the different institutions be part of these, that people may feel comfortable in their own public spaces, in their own public administrations. I also invite you. We created the International Observatory of Borders, Forced Migrations, Asylum, and Refugee that also has its it is based by our agency as well, the Spanish Agency of Aid to Refugees, that analyzes the situation of 5 to 6 borders of the world. Every year we have analyzed the border of Mexico with Guatemala, or the border of Lampedusa with the south and north of Africa, or even the Spanish border. We have to improve. There is a lot to do there to have a decent treatment in migrations. We have invested more than 1 million euros through organized civil society in our region for something which is so important, which is education for global citizenship, that distributes all type of educational actions in our region at the Junta de Extremadura and the 17 territories with some type of non-formal education, pedagogy, and also formal education. And let me explain myself. We are the region of the whole state that reduced the most the presence to recover education for citizenship in the region that really has an effect on the values of human rights, the 2030 agenda, the sustainable development goals. We have a whole series of educational activities against hatred because we want to offset those who raised walls. We want walls of peace and not those type of walls that many times are raised by the European Union. We need to guarantee peace. We need to guarantee peace. Those societies which best host the migrations and whose population best hosts the migrations, it doesn't have to be pedagogy based on the exodus that we have suffered, that it can be the result of what we live. And this is what we are trying to promote. Antonio, this is what we want to be part of in the future. Thank you so much. Angel, thank you so much. I would like to thank the organizing committee. The organizing committee will embrace, no doubt, that demonstration of commitment. And without any further ado, because always time is a greater dictatorship, we have a dictator that is time, and we need to start with the next plenary session, which is for gender violence. Now, I would like to thank Victor, Geraldina, has already been disconnected, Summer, Dolores, Alice, and Angel. 3 governments of 3 cities. or two governments of two cities and a government of a region, a center of research, the COLEF, Al Santo Quedaguer, that are also observed and proposed. This is an innovation laboratory and an international, very important network, a very important international network for the work of political incidents in order to work in the narrative of the Major Migration Council. Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you for being part of this forum, which no doubt is alive thanks to the participation and commitment of each and every one of you. I would also like to thank our audience, and unfortunately we were not able to on our Q&A. We thank you so much, and we will continue with the next plenary session.
Gracias, un gustazo. Nos vemos, cuídense. Buen día.
The name Roxas, and the number 13 were all I had. Who the people around me were, what they wanted, or what they were trying to do, I had no idea.
Good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to start this panel related to cities and territories free of gender violence. This is an hybrid panel, so some participants are connected remotely. We are going to give the floor to them and introduce them as we move forward in our discussion. Firstly, I am Belén Sanz, I'm representative of UN Women Mexico. I was asked to moderate this panel and focus on a multidisciplinary debate and from different scopes of the public sector, activism, and academia, about how we are working to prevent, to address, and also to eradicate violence against women in the public sphere of cities and territories as a fundamental ingredient for the construction of peace. In this regard, I'd like to greet my dear Ingrid, Secretary of Women of Mexico City's government. She reports to Dr. Claudia Sheinbaum. She is one of our leaders in local governments, and she's committed with women's rights. I'd like to greet Diana Alarcón, who can't be with us today, but I know she's following this panel, and she's behind this great organization. I'd like to say that this panel is also possible thanks to the interaction and dialogue between different institutions. And if you allow me, I'd like to greet and thank UNDP, UCLG, Ciudades Educadoras of the Ibero-American Secretary, Unión de Ciudades Capitales Iberoamericanas, the Federación Española of Municipios y Provincias, the Ibero-American States for Science, Education, and Culture, and the cities and governments of Barcelona, Madrid, Bogotá, La Paz, and San Salvador. We know you are behind the organization of this event. To start the panel for today, I'd like to start with a reflection. I know that our speakers and panelists will elaborate on this. It has to do with something that we have seen for many years as a result of the work of urban feminists who have shown us that cities and urban centers are not neutral because they configure and reconfigure the dynamics and social relationships. And of course, one of those dynamics has to do with gender relationships. And from that, we've been working from different institutions, both internationally and nationally and locally, to produce analysis to identify how urban design, in fact, affects women, girls, boys, and young men, and how this urban design should contemplate a gender perspective to address the dynamics of inequality in the territory, and from there transform it into equality territories. So I'd like to tell you that part of the work of UN Women indicates, along with cities, indicates that their urban spaces still reproduce inequality and discrimination. So we are working collectively to address this, but to give you an idea, data of the studies we've conducted indicate in the program of Safe Cities that we launched several years ago, the city of Puebla in Mexico, almost 60% of the surveyed women in the city are afraid to be sexually harassed and to suffer other sexual violence forms when they are in the streets. Or in the city of Guadalajara, 8 out of 10 women say they have suffered a form of sexual harassment in public spaces. So these data are replicated in all the cities in which we have data. Cities in different continents, we still see that public spaces, the freedom of transit and safety still pose a challenge, and we have to listen to women and girls to see how they experience cities and how cities can be transformed into a violence-free space. So from the point of view of women, their recovery and the economic reactivation seen in other countries as a result of the COVID pandemic is an opportunity to recognize how this pandemic has impacted women and men differently, something that we see clearly represented in local and territorial dynamics. And we congratulate the effort that several local governments are doing to focus, on one hand, on the prevention of violences and understanding the intersectionality of said violences, but also the development of care systems that have a response to the difficulties faced by women in our urban spaces, to redistribute these care burdens and also achieve the full development of society. So we hope that today's panel is not seen as an isolated panel where we only talk about the prevention of violences in the public sphere, but mainly a panel that is inserted within this broader discussion, and we may get reflections on the good practices from local practices in order to build integrating recovery agendas for gender equality. I'm going to give the floor to our panelists today. Because of time, I'm going to introduce each one. I'm going to give you the floor. We are going to ask some questions. We will have a first round of presentation, and according to time, we will start the second round of reflections. We are going to start with our panelists, who is in person. Ingrid and I said we are the only ones present here, but several of you are connected via internet, and that's why we have great panelists. We greet all of you who are far away. I'm going to give you the floor. Later, I'd like to introduce Ingrid Gomez-Saracipar, who is the Secretary of Women of Mexico City. She has a degree in psychology from Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, registered before the Labor Secretary as training agent, certified by the Directorate of Education of Tlalpan as professor. She has a long track record of more than 15 years in public administration at the 3 levels of government in the social and development sectors, and she's an expert in today's topics. Dear Ingrid, you have the floor. Among the topics we would like to discuss, we are going to ask Ingrid and the panelists how to address prevention of violence. Good morning, everyone. My colleagues in the panel, those who are far away, I send you a virtual and warm hug, and I salute your presence and the opportunity to dialogue and share experiences and knowledge. Of course, my dear Valensans, those who have made this forum possible, and also not only virtually as last year, but also in person, because we really were looking forward to this. So I think that the introduction you were giving gives rise to some of my reflections in the sense of what we've been developing as experience in Mexico City. From the Secretary of Women, we are tasked with coordinating and strengthening a great system that has to do with prevention, which is a fundamental task in public policies with respect to violence against women, gender violence. On the other hand, the attention, and we have a differentiated attention. I have to do something with this, right? I'm sorry. Well, I'm not going to start the presentation yet. The differentiated attention between those who come with several needs, women who come with different needs, to these first spaces of attention and contention, and those who are victims of a crime. It can be sexual violence, family violence, or domestic violence, and this is typified as a crime. And they should also receive a very specific attention, and the sanctions, which we think it is still important, not only in terms of access to justice, but also restitution of damage and guarantee of non-repetition, especially the collectives of victims, organizations, and collectives in favor of women's rights have put on the table. Beyond the sanctions, what victims need is a guarantee of non-repetition and damage restitution that do not necessarily have to go through lengthy processes, but rather focus on these needs of direct and indirect victims. Okay, so shall I start my presentation? I'd like to share some of the public policies that we've been implementing in Mexico City. We reactivated and strengthened a system of first contact units in the 16 municipalities. We have 27 units. Some municipalities have 2. Those are our territorial units for the attention and prevention of gender violence. LUNAS, that's the name. They are not an acronym or anything. This is how they are called. They are in the 16 municipalities. They provide attention from Monday to Friday, and we have a shift during weekends. We have a hotline. What's happening in these units? These are first contact units, so when women go there, we identify with a short interview if what they need is guidance or maybe they experience violence. If it's violence, it is important to differentiate the type and modality of violence, and above all, the magnitude of violence. And we also make a risk screening. Once we determine the risk, all of them go to specialized attention with legal follow-up, psycho-emotional follow-up, and what we call social work related to which institutional networks they need and which community networks may support them. If we detect that this is a case, that's why it's so important for us, this screening. If we see this is, it poses a risk of femicide, violence, it's like putting a light bulb, but this is, if we see this is a risky case, we work with them using other strategies, and even if they have to go to a shelter, they will go there. Otherwise, this is one of the legislative strategies fostered by Dr. Sheinbaum. She fostered the addition of a protection measure that we think is very important. The attacker leaves home. That's the name of the protection measure. An application is filed, and the person can evacuate the household irrespective of the ownership thereof. So the house can be of the attacker or the family of the attacker, and if the judge determines he has to leave, he leaves. So what do we do? Well, we support women, we do the paperwork. This is a lengthy procedure. This is done before courthouses. So what have we found with our program? This is a comprehensive program. We give economic support to women because oftentimes women leave their houses with nothing at all. So we give them economic support. This is a monthly minimum wage up to 6 months, and in critical cases that are evaluated, and we see the evolution of the case, 9 months. We are waiting to expand this strategy, that is the economic support, next year. This has also to do with the budget, but During these 2 years, practically, we've detected 1,274 cases of risk of femicide violence. 51% of these cases. So our strategy is working because it's a very focused strategy, and we give a personalized follow-up. Why can we do that in a city as large as this one? Well, because we are in the territories, because the women of Milpalta don't have to go to Mexico City's downtown or to the Justice Center in Iztapalapa. In fact, we have a lot of coordination with the justice centers for women. I showed you this graph because even though the attention decreased during the pandemic, even though we were open, the attention again is increasing. We see this is as a positive effect because with that we can issue an early warning of violence and start working where there's no critical risk or there's no risk of femicide, and we can take out women from this violent circle. I don't know how's my time. Can you tell me? Okay, so this is one of the strategies that is done in coordination, above all with the prosecutor's office. In 2019, the Femicide Prosecutor's Office was created in Mexico City, and the data we were giving last Monday, that was the Orange Day, we present a report on the public policy to fight women's violence. We have a decrease in the incidence of the crime of femicide because we have specialized investigation and also specialized sanctions. So we are preventing, because this is what LUNAs do. We do a screening, and we have this focalized strategy. We are preventing femicide violence and femicide, but also the access to justice has or is based on zero impunity. These two coordinated strategies are allowing us to decrease the incidence of femicide. Of course, we are not singing our praises or saying everything is great. We are aware that this venture this is a huge task before us, and we are working for the first time in 2021. We have this data. The strategies were implemented in 2019, both the prosecutor's office and this strategy, and we have very coordinated results and positive results. That's it. Thank you. Thank you, Ingrid. Yes, we are going to take off your presentation. And yes, you've shared specific actions from Mexico City's government with those strategies. Later on, we can delve into that. It was very interesting for what we are discussing today. I'd like to give the floor to Erin Bromakim. She is the Director of Olympic and Paralympic Development of the Office of International Affairs of the Mayor of Los Angeles. She is with us virtually. As I said, she is Director of Olympic and Paralympic Development, focused on performing the plans of the city so that LA is more sustainable, inclusive, resilient, and innovative before the Olympic Games and Paralympic Games of 2028. She is the member of the Diplomacy of the State and the City in the Truman Center of National Policies. She worked during 14 years as a high-level civilian in the DoD of the U.S. She managed the interinstitutional defense, intelligence, special ops, and efforts to reform security. Ms. Bromakim also worked for the U.S. Air Force and NATO. She has a degree from Wake Forest and Georgetown. Welcome, Erin. And we already sent you some questions. However you may want to start this first round.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much for the opportunity to join you today and for the invitation to be part of this discussion, which is so very important to my friends in Mexico City. Thank you for including us, and greetings from Los Angeles. I'm here today largely to talk about one of the things that we are working on in Los Angeles with Mexico City, among others, which is something called the City Hub and Network on Gender Equity, or CHANGE. And CHANGE is a network that we stood up in collaboration with 6 other cities in November of last year. And CHANGE is focused on what cities can do, what kind of unique authorities and leverage cities have to make progress on gender equity, the unique kind of angle that cities have with respect to the lives of women and girls and marginalized genders, and how we can use certain city authorities, certain powers, and the services that we provide to ensure that we have a gender lens at play through all of what we do. And so together with Mexico City, London, Barcelona, Freetown in Sierra Leone, Tokyo, and then now recently Buenos Aires, we've been able to come together across 5 continents as these 7 cities total and begin to look at how our cities are implementing this gender perspective in the work that we do. And coming up here on the 1-year anniversary of CHANGE later in November, we are going to be sharing kind of a toolkit of sorts that the cities have put together to try to articulate exactly how we've applied that gender lens and invite other cities around the world to join us in this work. So I'd point to just a couple highlights from that report that'll come out again later next month, which focuses in on how the different kind of aspects by which a city can take action. And the first is, I would say, we look at how the city is an innovator, meaning how have city authorities been able to mainstream a gender lens in the work that they do with the planning and structures that they put in place. In Los Angeles, we took this kind of to heart around 2015 by starting to look specifically at what data we had to track gender equity work in the city, and working with local universities to identify the state of women and girls in Los Angeles and better aggregate together our particular data sets around how we were tracking gender equity issues, everything through employment to participation in sports and recreation programs in the city. I would say in 2016-17, we issued our executive directive from the mayor's office to establish gender equity leads in each of the city departments and began producing an annual gender equity action plan with specific goals to track progress. And that became the responsibility of the general managers of each of our 38 city departments. That's one way in which a city can mainstream gender. And we know from our partners as part of the City Hub and Network on Gender Equity, or CHANGE, that each city has different ways of incorporating these policies into practice. So another way in which cities have particular control is around how they employ folks, right? So the city is often a large employer. They, through both the city departments themselves, as well as their policies around hiring and leadership, retention, as well as training, leave policies, as well as family support policies and childcare options. So the city as an employer has a huge role as well in terms of ensuring gender equity can be realized through the city's actions itself. I would say third, the city as a provider of services, often in partnership with private and nonprofit entities. How the city provides these services becomes a vehicle by which we can better understand ways to approach equity and apply that lens across all the actions of these services to be provided. And then last, the city as a connector. So how the city can both be a part of connecting internal, right, amongst its different sectors, public, private, nonprofit, faith-based organizations, and the city becomes a connector and a platform for bringing groups together around various policies, programs, services, and then also how to achieve gender equity through that connection. And then also the city as a connector globally. So how can cities be more directly engaged in shaping and realizing the policies around gender equity internationally as a human right and as part of some of our most important multilateral commitments and multilateral policymaking? I'd point in particular to cities' work on the Sustainable Development Goals, something that we've taken very seriously in Los Angeles and produced 2 specific voluntary local reviews of our progress towards the SDGs in LA. And I know in partnership with Mexico City and others, we've seen a lot of local action. Mexico this year delivered its voluntary national review, which included a big kind of aggregation of work done at the local level across various territories and localities throughout Mexico. And I think it's been a brilliant example of how grassroots and local action on issues including SDG 5 can together help inform the national government's direction and also how our multilateral institutions respond to these policies. So I would encourage everyone to visit citieschange.org, O-R-G, to learn more about change as a network and join us as we share more information about this toolkit to come forth in the next month, as well as an event later in November. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you so much, Erin, for sharing this experience with us, as well as some ideas on the different dimensions of the city as a connector, service provider, provider of employees. Very interesting topics. Now, I would like to give the floor to Jung Chung Chung, President of the Seoul Foundation for Women and Family. We are going to hear her message now.
I'm Jung Chung, President of the Seoul Foundation of Women and Family. First of all, it is very honorable for us to present our effort of free gender violence at this forum. We, Seoul Foundation of Women and Family, have worked to support the policy development on women and family in Seoul by conducting related research and projects. We have cooperated with Metropolis women as the Seoul antenna to improve the city's gender mainstreaming. In 2017, Seoul focused its attention on dating violence and online sexual violence that occur in intimate relationship and daily settings. To address this, we switched the policy framework from hardware orientation to raising citizen awareness of the issue. Also, we have been running a dedicated core center for dating violence and prevention education program, which target university students. For instance, we have signed MOU with 29 universities in Seoul to build a safe and gender equal campus. Moreover, with respect to the increasing issue of sexual violence in the online, we carried out the preventive project that get rid of illegal sexual videos and provided victims support. As a result of all these activities, the relevant laws were amended and the National Government Rebel Victim Support Center has been established. In addition to this, Seoul City is running integrated service system for victims of sexual violence. Victims can get one-stop counseling, medical, legal, and investigating services, which are available 24 hours a day. In spite of all these outcomes, important and urgent tasks still remained. Because we have focused on different types of victim support systems and policies, there are loopholes for type of gender violence we are yet to include in the existing policies. To this end, Seoul is striving to establish and integrate gender violence policy initiatives for eliminating the blind spot. The Seoul city government announced the Seoul Vision 2030 last month as its new strategic plan pursuing to establish environmental free of gender violence as the core. The Seoul city going to continue to make safe city projects where all citizens feel more safe. And we also do our best to implement all this strategy. Thank you for listening. Have a good one.
Thank you so much for sharing the experience in Seoul. And now we are going to give the floor to Isabel Andreone, Director of Montevideo Rural. It's City Hall in Montevideo. She is from 2020 to 2025. She works in the design of strategic lines of public policy for the different family production. She has this master's degree in social economy. Isabel Andrioni, you have the floor now. Thank you so much. I don't know if it's good morning or good afternoon for everybody. Thank you so much for providing this space. Ingrid, thank you so much. We were able to meet you personally when we were in Mexico. Let me explain this from the standpoint of the government of Montevideo that has been for 31 years now under the same political definition. The importance that throughout the years the process has and how by analyzing the different programs in order to clarify things, the government of Montevideo, let me clarify this, has a program. This program is elaborated with the participation of around 3,000 neighbors in charge of drafting this government plan. We have to sign that plan and we commit ourselves to implement that program. It is throughout all these programs. It has been 7. We start first with the Frente Amplio government administration. We start to introduce as part of the government plan the vision or the concept of gender. So throughout all these years, we have been moving forward in the process of the inclusion of the terms of gender, which is only the expression that the system has in general regarding gender-related violence, discrimination, poverty, the concentration of wealth. They all are several different ways to express the violence exercised by the system where the values and principles of society are based. This is even made worse by race, age, or gender. But the first program that was drafted places on the center of the public opinion the concept of gender, as well as the concept of violence related to gender, specifically for women. We built therefrom what we call today the women communities, like the Lunas in Mexico. They have the system. I won't be explaining that system, but today, in a territory of 200 square kilometers, we have 14 Comunas Mujer, or women's centers, where we do not only provide attention for gender-based violence, but also we work in training of women. Starting from the past administration, the past cycle, we started to perform a very profound job to raise awareness and educate not only women, but in addition to Comunas Mujeres, they go also to men groups, precisely to the 8,000 government officers of the government of Montevideo, and it is through workshops that we convey these ideas, explaining what gender-based violence means. We have created new institutions in order to fight something which is, as part of the values of the system, we had to create new institutions institutions which are mainly territorial institutions with the participation of all the governments in the municipalities, the neighborhoods. That is to say, a whole institutional articulation of stakeholders to generate regulations that were passed 4 years ago against violence in public spaces. And we also take as public space violence, public transportation violence. And one of the actions that had to be taken was a specific regulation because it was common, the aggression of men and women when we were traveling in the collective public transportation system. There are claims filed, immediate actions taken together with the help of the police, and we were then approaching the next steps in order to create gender-related violence-free spaces. During the pandemic and this year, mainly, we concentrated on the economic emancipation of women, in spite of the fact that the government of Montevideo has usually fills the different spaces through open competitions with a gender quota. This is not only for administrative jobs, but also for laborers. The laborers were all men, but all this led to the fact that we had to make an intervention in the different city hall and all the different spaces to be filled with laborers, with women who had to be ready to for these jobs. This was a construction, and just explaining it in a few words, but it was a long process, a complicated process. We had to work very hard, and therefore the mayor's office also changed the way it operated. They reduced the patriarchal decisions and the way we work internally. Finally, and to close my comments, when I was a child, it was taught that if you depend economically, you depend politically. That's why we are also now, in these last few years, trying to work very hard in the emancipation of women, the economic emancipation of women, because we know that many times women have to withstand situations and do not file a claim because they don't have job possibilities. This is something that there are some projects like the Economic Forum for the installation of production units, which will be managed by women. Therefore, we give women all the necessary training. We support them so that the new production units may move forward. I believe that approaching from the City Hall gender-related violence is a multi-institutional, multi-dimensional approach, as well as a multidisciplinary approach, because we need to coordinate things, and we still find that there are places with black boxes, which is the jurisprudence, which is not based on concrete facts, and many times the concrete fact ends with the death of women. So we still need to work hard on legislation and actions based on psychological violence or silent violence. We still have a very important challenge to face. It is not only women, it's also men, because I have to say clearly that we will not be able to move forward successfully if we don't do it together with men, because men are part of this challenge. Thank you very much. Isabel, thank you very much. Thank you for sharing that regulation and public policy explanation with us that covers many of the elements covered by other speakers and also the challenges that we are facing forward. Now I would like to give the floor to the next speaker, Numusa Shembe. She is Senior Manager of Safe Cities in South Africa. She is the Director of the Unit of Safe Cities responsible for the prevention of social welfare and urban protection. She is an expert in social development with ample experience in community development, safety and facilitation. She has worked for the last 20 years in the province and local governments promoting social development programs, namely the promotion of safety, health, and social cohesion. You have the floor now. Welcome.
Thank you. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And thanks to the organizers who invited us as eThekwini to participate in this forum to discuss issues around cities free of gender violence. As mentioned, I'm Nomusa Shembe from eThekwini Municipality in Durban. I would briefly like to give a context of eThekwini Municipality that we have a population of about 3.7 million, wherein 51% are women. Also, we have a third of the population that live below the poverty line. And unfortunately, mostly of those are women who suffer the brunt of poverty. Unfortunately, also we have a crime that sits at a rate of 49 per 100,000 murder rate, as well as issues around social ills which confront the city in relation to drug and alcohol abuse. What we have done to improve the state of safety in the city through evidence-based approaches. In 2019, we conducted a citywide safety audit, which involved more than 2,000 respondents from different households. That we conducted highlighted very critical issues that affect women, in particular around transport, safety, as well as mobility. And in the audit, women were asked about the mode of transport that they use on a daily basis when they commute. And it was reported that about 59% are commuting using minibus taxis, and about 57% of women reported that they don't feel safe when they travel on this mode of transport. And therefore, these findings led us to develop different interventions and strategies, and one of them was the development of the city safety strategy, which was concluded in 2020. It's a 5-year strategy. We also, as an intervention, partnered with Safety Pin, and this partnership was launched during the AFUS, African Forum on Urban Safety Learning Exchange, that was held in eThekwini in 2019. And this was also followed by the training of 30 women to use Safety Pin app. And this partnership was further extended to local NGOs and which were in Kwamashu and Kwandengezi. They're called Kukudlamini Foundation, and Kwandengezi was a Tembeni Crisis Center. The intention was to embed the local actions in the implementation of our strategy, the city safety strategy, so that we ensure that our interventions are localized and they have a particular response from the communities. After that, we conducted safety pin audits in high-risk wards. A total of 1,006 audits were generated through the safety pin night, and 401 audits were conducted using the safety pin app in 6 taxi ranks and on transport routes, as you have indicated that the problem that women were experiencing were in taxi, which are mini bus taxis that they normally use. The issues that were identified in this safety pin audit were around the infrastructure and also within the safety ambit. So above 40% of women indicated that they do not feel safe because there is no police visibility in the space. But also there was issues of poor lighting were reflected as issues, and therefore this we were able to engage the Department of Area-Based Management to accelerate service delivery through the Operation Good Hope, and is now using the results of both the citywide strategy as well as the citywide audit and the safety pin to improve the infrastructure in terms of maintenance, repairing those infrastructure that are not well maintained. And this is happening on a regular basis through various operations that are taking place. Also, the taxi associations have committed to train their drivers on customer service and gender-sensitive behavior change. We have also collaborated with Masipepe to roll out behavior change interventions as the city, and this is an NGO that we have partnered with, and we have signed a memorandum of understanding with them. We have also established as a city the gender-based forum, which is coordinating the interventions at a local level. This gender-based forum is located within the city administration office, where the mayor's office is located, and there is also a gender office within the mayor's office which drives these interventions as well. So I think with the gender forum, we are able now to work very closely with national government. We are also working closely with the provincial government as well as NGOs that are within our space. I thank you for the opportunity, and good night.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nomusa Shembe, for sharing your experience, tu experiencia. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much. And now I would like to give the floor to Chifelele Novese. She's a researcher of the Program of Inclusive Cities in South Africa, and she coordinates the Urban Safety Group, the first platform of infrastructure for urban safety centered in the professionals of cities in South Africa. She has a wide program directed to evidence institutionalization of urban safety, the integration of a practice in selected terms and the support for capacities and necessary resources for the cities for violence prevention and safety programs. Ifilele, you have the floor. I remind you that we only have 5 minutes for each of the participations. You have the floor now. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. So, and perhaps just to thank the organizers of the platform for having us here once again. As I've been introduced so well, I represent the South African Urban Safety Reference Group. And I'm hoping that, I'm not able to see the slides, but I'm hoping that you are able to. So we are a platform that brings together safety managers responsible for safety in the 8 major cities in South Africa. And one of our key advocacy points is the localization of policy. So we take from global policy, including the new urban agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, also the continental African agenda in terms of the AU Strategy 2063. At the local level, well, at the national level, rather, let me say, we work to embed and to come up with the city's or local government response to key pieces of policy like the Integrated Urban Development Framework, the White Paper on Safety and Security, and most recently the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Genocide. And this most recent development in terms of the National Strategic Plan, or the NSP, which sits within our Department of Women and People with Disabilities as the driving or steering department, has called on us to imagine and to craft a response from local government level as to what it means for the sphere of action that is at the local level, responding to the broad vision of the strategy as women and South Africa free from gender-based violence that affects women, children, and people of LGBTQI identities. So this is for us at the local level, being a platform that coordinates local government actors. These pieces of policy, they call for us to drive a really strong agenda around localization, mainstreaming, institutionalization of anti-gender-based violence initiatives, and really driving the point around being as transversal, meaning that they need responses beyond policing, beyond law enforcement, and need social, economic interventions that also recognize the key drivers of violence and crime as economic, spatial, social, and overall related to poverty and inequality as well. So as a platform, we have quite a robust knowledge agenda. And as my colleague Nomusa has already said, coming from a city and a city department that participates on our platform, evidence is quite critical. So one of our key interventions in support of cities is the generation of key evidence, aggregating national crime statistics to the city level, producing policy brief on key thematic topics such as public space in one sense, and our work on public space focuses on parks and some of the peer-to-peer learning and exchange that has happened between our member cities, including eThekwini, the city of Johannesburg, and others, around how parks can be activated, how they can be vibrant spaces that drive economic activity, inclusive growth, well-being, and also just reflecting together as practitioners around the gender exclusion from public spaces of women and from spaces that are supposed to be social, spatial, and economic goods. So due to unsafety, women and other vulnerable groups are not able to enjoy their right to space in our cities. And so our interventions around parks and space look to unlock a broader inclusion of people within our parks. And in the city of Etequini, over and above the efforts to include and make spaces safer for women, there have been great efforts to include homeless persons, of which women are part of homeless demographics in our city. We also produce practice notes and tools on how to engage, for example, different sectors of our societies within cities around issues of safety. So quite a big focus among us on tools, techniques of how to engage various classes of citizens in the city, including children and women. We have also had in the past learning and exchange, as I mentioned, around parks and public space, looking at leveraging different resources, driving the point around transversality of safety and inclusion of women, and creating safety for women through a program of training called the Park Activators Coordinators Training, where we leverage resources through a public employment program as park activators and training those resources as people who can conduct safety audits. So these are just some of the practical tools and products and activities that we engage in support of cities and local governments to localize, mainstream, institutionalize, and engage on gender inclusivity and anti-gender-based violence in a transversal way that calls on different functions and competencies within the city. Thank you.
Thank you. All the work and tools and platform that I think it's at disposal of everybody here, so thank you so much for that. And also por poner sobre la mesa elementos.
Thank you so much for putting on the table central elements of the different local challenges in order to give visibility to the different actions for the prevention and attention of violence. Now I would like to give the floor to Dora Barranco, the next speaker. She's an academician and an activist of Argentina. We know her, she's a sociologist and he a PhD in history from Brazil, a consultant professor of the School of Social Science of the UBA, a researcher with a great trajectory. She was director of the CONICYT representing humanities and social sciences between 2010 and 2019. She directed doctorate and master's degree of the National University of Quilmes, and she is the author of many publications in social science and gender studies. It's a pleasure for me to introduce you, Dora. You have the floor now.
Thank you very much. First, I'd like to thank the organizers of this forum. It already has a tradition. Thank you, Belen. Thank you, Ingrid. I'll be as fast as possible, trying to keep up with what you asked for. I'd like to say that my country is taking important steps with respect to what should be addressed to eradicate violence against women and LGBTQ plus people. It is obvious to say that we will only eradicate violence, structural violence against women and LGBTQ plus people if we eradicate the patriarchal system and systems of economic and social oppression. I think this is a truth, but it's important to underscore it. I'd like to mention quickly the creation of the Ministry of Women, Gender and Diversity due to our new government in December of 2019. And since then, an initiative that I think is essential, singular, and also very transcendental, which is the creation of the National Plan of Fight Against All Types of Violence, which is many or entails many devices around three fundamental elements: prevention, direct aid in all senses for victims, strengthening of the accessibility and support before justice, and finally, how to produce adequate information to take into account the divergence problems and the lack of statistical heterogeneity in our country. I'd like to say that the national plan has more than 150 actions around the idea of intersectionality, the legal system, I mean the three branches, the executive, legislative, and judicial branches that are committed with this, all the dimensions of execution of the executive branch. They should manage part of the plan up to year 2022 with significant resources. I'd like to highlight one of the programs. We have several ones within the plan, which is a program of direct monetary assistance for victims. It's one minimum wage until the first 3 months. This can be expanded. I can't leave behind that thanks to all the battles in our country, we achieved on December 30 of last year, I like to say at 4:14 a.m., our law on legalization of abortion in our country. This is a huge step. Thank you for your applauses. It's very touching to see all our fights. We have a law that is exemplary to be replicated. Anyway, I'd like to say another essential aspect in our institutional life is the sanction of the law Micaela, which is a notable law. It is after Micaela Garcia because she died of a femicide that could be prevented because there was negligence of the Argentinian state, and therefore the Micaela law, I'd like to be very fast with this, refers to the need of training all the agents of the Argentinian state, whatever their role is, and hierarchy. And in the three branches of the state should be trained to act, design policies, issue judgments and sentences with a gender perspective. This is what our Micaela law sets forth. Just to wrap up, I'd like to tell you that everything we are doing seems to be not enough. There are two situations that should be addressed, one for prevention, another for direct assistance. The first one, we want to eradicate the patriarchy if we keep on keeping educational systems whose curriculum fosters gender violence. We need to eradicate that cultural mesh that still accentuate violent behaviors. And number two, and just to conclude, we want to advance in another essential aspect to somehow eradicate violence, and is how we modify the labor market that in our countries, I think in other countries represented here, mean that undermine the conditions for women and diversities. The invisible hand of the market is a patriarchal order. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, dear Dora, and also for discussing structural topics behind public policies, to talk about the market and the development model that this pandemic has shown is unsustainable and also affects women especially. And when we conclude, we are going to discuss this. Now, let's go to a message from the Executive Director of UN Women from New York, Åsa Regner, who is a Swedish social democrat politician. She was Minister of Children and Elders and Minister of Gender Equality in Sweden in 2014. She has broad expertise in policies for gender equality, including several posts of leadership in government and non-government organizations, and now in the UN. She currently holds her position since, this was done since 2018. We give the floor to her.
Si lo tenemos por ahí, por allá.
Is the video ready? Who can help us with the video?
Colleagues, partners with whom we cooperate in the UN Women Safe Cities initiative, thank you for having me. I'm excited to join you today in this World Forum on Cities and Territories of Peace, hosted by Mexico City. This session is very timely, following the successful Generation Equality Forum held earlier this year in Mexico. The forum brought together 50,000 participants and kick-started a powerful multi-stakeholder movement to accelerate progress for gender equality and women's rights over the next 5 years. Your event also comes at a good time, coinciding with the 10th anniversary of UN Women's Safe Cities and Safe Public Spaces Global Initiative. The initiative spans 54 cities in 32 countries, with integrated programs led by mayors, grassroots women's organizations, youth, and other important partners to end sexual harassment in diverse settings. This program has been implemented with great commitment already in various cities in Mexico and other Latin American countries and the global north. Our common effort to create safe cities is having clear results. For example, recent evaluations show that in Quito, in Ecuador, and in Port Moresby, in Papua New Guinea, women's experience of sexual harassment in public spaces has been reduced, and women's feelings of safety in using public spaces has increased. As part of our commitment to the Action Coalition on Gender-Based Violence, we plan to reach an additional 50 cities by 2025. We know that leadership by local and municipal governments, working with a range of partners, is essential to address the multiple causes of gender-based violence, which is mostly violence by men towards women they know or even live together with. It's a big task to ensure that women can safely and meaningfully participate and lead to build and sustain peaceful societies. We need to take on that task. Unfortunately, women's meaningful participation and leadership are continuously hampered by widespread gender inequality and its most appalling consequence, gender-based violence or men's violence against women. This is the most pervasive yet least visible human rights violation in the world. It causes profound physical, sexual, mental or economic harm on its victims, and it breeds further cycles of violence, not only at the local level, but also globally. Therefore, it's really important that all of us try to do what we can to prevent and stop this violence, and it's therefore also paramount to engage men and boys in this effort. To build cities and territories of peace, we must focus on promoting gender equality and women's and girls' empowerment at every level. We must engage both men and women as agents of change to advance urban infrastructure developments with a focus on gender and to improve women's and girls' safety. Local governments should also join the United Cities and local governments' call for a global feminist municipal movement to put care at the center of the COVID-19 recovery and to do something about the unproportionate burden of care on the shoulders of women as it is right now in the world. All of these actions have the potential to prevent women's rights violations and thus repeated cycles of violence anywhere, no matter if a woman lives in a rural or an urban setting, and no matter if it concerns a peace or a crisis context. Thank you so much for having me, and we look forward to working with all of you on these important issues.
Very well, thank you, Osa Ragnar from UN Women in New York. Now, we are going to the last part of this panel. I think that the wealth of your experiences from around the world and also local public policies have put on the table many common elements. I'll try to make a conclusion, but before that we have very few minutes left, and since Ingrid, you and I are live, luckily, so maybe based on what you have heard and the reflection from your work in Mexico City, what are the challenges you see ahead to consolidate and transform the situation of violence and inequality in urban spaces? Yes, thank you very much. I agree with Dora. By the way, greetings to Isabel and everyone, of course, but I agree with Dora that one of the biggest challenges, in fact, has to do with, well, if we want to advance and if we want to have a transformation, as young collectives say, we have to end patriarchy. So I think that the agenda of advocacy should be based on education. And we should propose not only contents, but also the educational model itself, so that we transform these gender mandates that we learn and that we relearn as well, and they produce cultural inequalities. Mexico City is a very diverse city, and it has big challenges. Women are not the ones who are in the municipality of Cuauhtémoc that has a large floating population compared to women who work or live in Milpalta or in Tlalpan. I come from a municipality of the south, which is Tlalpan. It has towns, well, indigenous towns and an important conservation land. And I think that another big challenge, apart from education, has to do with strengthening, because everyone said it, all the panelists, strengthening the autonomy, the economic autonomy of women. It's not only about jobs or economic development and credit strategies, but I think that after these months in the pandemic, it's urgent to do something about care. During the pandemic, we, all women, became, we didn't do that necessarily before, but we had to do it de facto. We became caregivers of others who needed this due to the family conditions and the structural conditions we were facing due to the pandemic. I remember, since my sister's family had COVID, I had to help them in taking care of them, and that implied to allocate certain hours to that. And in Mexico City, the average is 38, 50 hours weekly without pandemic that women dedicate to taking care of others and domestic chores. So in the pandemic, with all this online work plus the burden of care, I'm not a mother of small children, but I saw that with colleagues who had to be 4 hours with their children while they were in school online, and also developing your own work. So as Nayeli, the president of the Human Rights Commission in Mexico City, she made a study about childhood during lockdown. One of the aspects that stands out in the study, they conducted interviews to girls and boys, is the feminization of domestic work from very early ages. Girls were starting to help, to take care for their brothers, support them during their classes and also in domestic chores. So this point of the agenda is urgent because it will allow us to have access to fairer job markets for women. And this also has to do with violence, where women in risk, these 1,271 women are between 20 and 35 years of age. In average, they attended elementary and middle school, but 80% have a precarious economic condition. They are housewives. They do not work. They only do domestic chores. They do not receive any wages or recognition, no retirement, nothing, many hours of work, or they have this catalog sales works, or they have no jobs after the pandemic. So the agenda is there, and we have to see the territory, because territories, at least in the city, are diverse. The advocacy agenda has to have an important territorial approach if we want to advance and transform it. Thank you very much, Ingrid, for your final reflections. As I said, I'd love to have one or more rounds because you've showed us the tip of the iceberg, and I know that the participants, both the panelists and those who are in person and those who are connected, would have a lot to contribute. But it's important to open up this conversation. And this Forum on Cities and Territories of Peace is committed to that. So in 2 minutes, As final reflections or conclusions, I'm going to highlight something you put on the table that can help us to continue with the conversation. On one hand, you've shared, I'm going to call it second-generation public policies with respect to the prevention, eradication, and sanction of violence against women in the territory. And there's an accumulated experience on the first-generation policies where the approach was violence, domestic violence, and the policy to address violence was more sectorial. You talked about the integrality of the response of violence against women in the territory due to the integral need to address it. And as Ingrid said, in the territory, all the problems are manifested. So you talked about integral care centers, not only for the direct victims, but also they expand the provision of services to give opportunities to women for their economic autonomy and access to other services. You talked about territoriality. Isabel said that this multidimensional approach, an interinstitutional and multidisciplinary approach, understanding that only like this we can address this problem. You talked about the development of public policies and all the attention of violence in the public sphere needs specific policies, but also you talked about new policies and institutions. That is, the institutional dynamic demands specialization of the institutions in the territory. So I think that what you mentioned about public policies, it was very interesting. A third element has to do with the city as a connector. Erin was very clear regarding the transformative potential of the city. It's not only challenges for the population, but also all the opportunities of connectivity of cities, including the reality of women. A fourth point was that related to the use of tested tools from local governments and validated internationally, the safety audits that some colleagues from South Africa talked about, the budgets to respond to gender issues and other public policies tools that are available. And for this community, it's very important not to reinvent the wheel, but use the existing tools and the platforms that have been developed. And in addition, I think that you have been very clear, and Dora said this very clearly, the structural elements related to violence against women in public spaces and the territory have to do with this patriarchal configuration, not only of our societies, but also our market. And I think, Dora, you mentioned something very deep related to the development model. Well, COVID has questioned it, and women are showing us, Ingrid said, women are showing us avenues to overcome this crisis. All countries have been affected by this, and this needs to be a feminist recovery, a transformative recovery, a recovery with all women and all the people who live in that territory. And there are two clear challenges, and many others, but two I heard from you that we should tackle collectively. One has to do with that transformative market model, a development model that really allows us in the territory to put women at the core, and on the other hand, the work in the care systems that Ingrid mentioned at the end, because definitely there's a lot of evidence in all the countries and cities where we've conducted studies that the care burden was increased for women during the pandemic, but it's not new. This is the result of an inequitable distribution system. And many cities are focusing on this, of course, and we think this is a great opportunity for a transformative recovery where the situation is really transformed. I'm going to conclude by saying that Mexico's government with UN Women launched this alliance in this forum Equality Generation, and then it was done in Paris, a global alliance for care that invites all stakeholders to be part of it, including local governments and cities. So I invite all the local governments attending this forum to explore this partnership and be part of it, because we want to accelerate the commitments to produce policies and systems and specific commitments in the redistribution of care. So one of the points that also Reitner mentioned in terms of what we're doing in UN Women with the Global Safe Cities program is the call, she said, this global feminist movement for cities with equality post-COVID. So today's forum is a great opportunity to strengthen this partnership and platform. And we have many elements we can take from here. I thank each one of the panelists because you've presented interesting approaches, and we will keep on working collectively.
Back in Boston, we didn't know what to do. So, she says, let's just wait it out. You know, we can be all poetic and just lose our minds together. I wasn't alone. So, I'm still waiting for my turn. Hey, wait.